Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Velez, and I'm here with my co-host, Joel Dehls. This is episode number 18 of the Fantasy Reaction Show, and we are here after Thursday night football. We just watched the Steelers versus the Titans. As you see in the name of the title, we of course have to talk about who was a sensation last week. We're going to be talking about quarterback Will Levis, but before we get into that, Mr. Joel Dehls, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing fantastic, man. We recorded the Patreon earlier today, so if you're not subscribed to the Patreon, go subscribe. It's $1. You get an extra episode a week with all of our NFL picks. It's basically like an extra episode of the podcast. All four of us are up there. But I'm feeling good. You see the title, is Will Levis a franchise quarterback? It's always exciting when you see these young guys, come onto the scene and perform the way he has. I know the stats, 22 of 39, 260, no touchdowns. Maybe doesn't show the whole story. He was fantastic tonight. But how are you, Joe?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. I can't really complain too much. I'd said before the game started, I need a Deontay Johnson masterclass. I need a Derrick Henry masterclass.
They
I
both put
can't be
on.
too upset, sir. The outcome was pretty spot on, exactly what I wanted. Both those guys get into the end zone. But before we get into the nitty gritty, if you guys are new to the channel, we ask you guys to please subscribe. If you guys want to know when we drop new content, go ahead and turn that notification bell on. If you guys like what you're watching so far, go ahead and drop a like on this video. It really does help us out. Stick around to the end. We're going to be giving you guys our starts and sits of week 9 for fantasy football. We're going to be going through the injury report. And without further ado, sir, let's talk about this Thursday night football game. Now, name of the title, Will Levis, franchise quarterback. Now, it's an interesting conversation because, like you just mentioned, you mentioned the numbers. They're not anything too eye-popping. 22 for 39, 262 yards. Did have that INT that basically ended the game. But I will say I was impressed with one thing more importantly than the rest, and that's the arm talent that Will Levis possesses. He naturally has one of the stronger arms that I've seen, and I say that with very little effort. He can throw a ball on a line wherever he wants it to go. Now, of course, he could be a little bit more accurate, but the arm strength alone. There was a lot of passes that I saw that impressed me where pressure was in his face. He stands strong in the pocket. He trusts his feet. He trusts his eyes. He trusts the progression of the plays. But his arm talent is so unbelievable that the ball just goes where he wants it to go in terms of velocity, in terms of speed, getting on the receiver. But in terms of placement accuracy, that's one thing that he definitely can get better at. But I liked what I saw. I can't really be too critical on the stats when watching the game. It seemed like pressure was in his face constantly throughout the entirety of the night. And really, that's what it comes down to more than anything else. That's something that Ryan Tannehill has faced as well. But what I was impressed with was his pocket presence and his ability to stand strong and confident in the pocket. Now, I asked this question to you because, of course, the title says, is Will Levis, or, Will Levis is a franchise quarterback. Do you think that's the case? Do you still need to see more? Or are you bought in? This is the guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be all the way bought in with just 2 games, but what you've seen so far, you have to feel fantastic about. I mean, we talk about all of these other rookie quarterbacks, right? Anthony Richardson before he went down, CJ Stroud after 3 or 4 games, Bryce Young, what he's done this last month, and everyone's kind of bought in on all of those guys. So I think the fact that Will Levis is a second round pick, the fact that most people soured on him during the draft process, and then, of course, during the NFL draft, every NFL team passed up on him on that first round. It does feel like it takes a little bit extra for Levis. He kind of has that, built-in kind of, a pause on, is he a franchise quarterback? Because he wasn't as highly touted as these other guys. But when you've seen these 2 games, you have to feel fantastic. Like you mentioned, the arm strength is there. The arm talent, that was never a question.
Nope.
What I was most impressed with in this game is he was under pressure constantly. Like, we know how great the Steelers pass rush is from Highsmith, TJ Watt. They were getting in his face. He was getting hit. He got sacked 4 times, but he was probably pressured, I don't know, at least 10, it felt like. So the fact that he was able to stay in that pressure, still throw the ball nearly 40 times, the Titans believe in him. Of course, that last drive, maybe inflate the numbers a little bit where they have to pass the ball. But it felt like that was the best course of action. Derrick Henry had a really good game. We've seen this last month, kind of Derrick Henry get more into that vintage form,
Love
but
to see it.
like the passing offense, and again, this is with really one weapon, right? DeAndre Hopkins has been excellent so far, but outside of that, I mean, talking about Kyle Phillips, who had a good game, but normally he's nothing special. Treylon Burks has the talent, but he's not been able to stay up the field. Of course, prayers to him. It sounds like he will be okay. But this is a game where there's really one weapon. Henry's doing his thing. The offensive line's getting beat for the most part. And this was on the road against Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you're a Titans fan, you have to feel really good about Will Levis. The arm talent is there, like you mentioned. It's really just, can he consistently do this? Can he consistently be accurate? Because what we've seen throughout the NFL is arm strength only takes you so far, right? If arm strength was the end-all, be-all, Drew Lock would be one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
He's the first name that comes to mind.
Always the first name, but it's about having the touch, the accuracy, the leadership, everything else that comes with being the quarterback. But from a talent perspective, he's got a lot of the tools you like.
With the conversation of a franchise quarterback in Will Levis, like you mentioned, he wasn't as highly touted as the AR, the Bryce, and of course the CJ. But off last week and this week, he gets himself another week into that conversation where, of course, versus the Falcons, he was near perfect. Against the Steelers, given situation, given the fact that DeAndre Hopkins had a tough matchup with Joey Porter, and of course, DeAndre Hopkins had his moments where he got his. You got to tip your cap to Joey Porter. He did himself an excellent job defending DeAndre Hopkins.
I have the numbers here for Porter and D-Hop.
I'm interested.
So Joey Porter lined up against DeAndre Hopkins on 26 of 36 routes, so 72.2% shadow rate. He was in press coverage on 20 of those routes, 77%. On those routes, Hopkins caught 1 reception, 17 yards on 5 targets.
Joey Porter is special. Joey
really
Porter
good.
is one of the best corners in this draft class. He is spectacular. We saw that on full effect when Cooper Kupp and the Rams played against the Steelers, and Joey Porter was one of the few that limited Cooper Kupp. But again, doing this against one of the best that we've seen in our lives, at least, DeAndre Hopkins, even though DeAndre Hopkins is not the D-Hop that we once knew, you got to tip your cap to the kid and really give acknowledgement when it's due. But in the grand scheme of things, when that's the case, and your guy's essentially on an island, your go-to option is essentially on an island, and you have to dink and dunk, you have to try your best to move the ball down the field. Given the situation, given what Will Levis was dealt in this game, I mean, I really like what I saw, and I'm definitely keeping my eyes on Will Levis, and he's definitely caught my attention as a player without a doubt. Now, let's just really just kind of get a broad scheme of this game. Give me your standouts. Of course, we talked about Derrick Henry a little bit, Deontay Johnson. I feel like that's one of the guys I want to talk about, but talk to me. What's your standout in this game?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit before. Derrick Henry, I mean, there's a stat out there how month by month by month, he just becomes a better player, a better rusher, more yards. But we're talking from week 4, RB6, 27, 4, 13, and 1. He had, I shouldn't say a bad start for the year, but we saw Tajay Spears get involved, and he was still Tajay involved in this game too. We saw him get involved. We saw Derrick Henry have a bad, week 3 against Cleveland where he put up like 2 fantasy points. And it felt like Derrick Henry wasn't the Derrick Henry we've known over these past few years. But he's getting back to that type of guy, right? 22 carries, 17 carries these last 2 weeks. He has a couple of games of 20 plus carries in that first month of the season. So for someone who, maybe early on felt like, damn, maybe I reached a little bit on Henry. Maybe he's, falling off at age 29. What we've seen for these last 5, 6, 7 years with Derrick Henry, however long it's been, he's still that guy. And Will Levis being this great, the offense becoming more explosive is just going to help him. If you have a real threat to get beat down the field and you have a quarterback who can beat you down the field, that's going to open up the boxes. It's going to make life easier for Derrick Henry and this offense as a whole.
You couldn't have said it better at all, really, with the idea that you have a quarterback that can push the ball downfield and you actually have to worry about that as a defense. Derrick Henry's going to be the recipient of just better looks. It's just naturally going to be the case. What we've known this Tennessee offense to be over these last few years that Derrick Henry has been Derrick Henry is that they're going to stack the box. They're going to allow the quarterback and these weapons on the outside to beat them as opposed to Derrick Henry, because we've seen that Derrick Henry can just churn out these yards, destroy the clock, and they could win games like that. One of the few running backs in football, at least in our time, that is able to do that at such a high level. So it is great to see Derrick Henry continue to get better as the weeks go on. I know we were concerned about him early on in the season, but it came to a point where you just realize Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry. You have to respect the legends while they're still getting this insane amount of workload. And where insane for Derrick Henry, we know it could be a lot more than a 17 carries on a night type of situation. We still know he can be great with his touches. And once they get to the goal line or near the goal line, we know that that's mostly 100% Derrick Henry getting into the end zone. Now, there's a couple guys I want to mention. Now let's shift over to the Steelers side of the ball. Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. Najee may have had his best game just visually looking at him. He seemed his most explosive, had a drop, didn't think too much about it because he caught the next pass that was thrown to him. But to me, it seemed as if this was the most explosive that he's looked, the most comfortable that he's looked against a really solid run unit in Tennessee. And even with that being said, Jaylen Warren was more impressive. Jaylen Warren was more explosive. It does not take much when you're watching the game to realize who just has a little bit more juice behind them, who's breaking that extra tackle, and who's just blowing by a defender. Jaylen Warren provides that, plus the versatility of being a pass catcher in his own right. For Jaylen Warren to have less carries, for him to have less carries than him by 5 less touches on the ground, and for him to outrush him by almost 20 yards, it should not be the case that Najee is seeing this many looks when, in his own right, Jaylen Warren is a strong-ass running back. He can get through some guys. He can break some tackles. He is a strong dude. I think it's the idea that Najee was drafted in the first round, that
Absolutely.
they are sticking around and trying to make it as if this was not a bad selection. And again, Najee looked good today. I say this with the idea that Najee did look good, but Jaylen just looks better.
Absolutely. And, not only did he outcarry him, Najee also had more targets than him, but Warren
Yep.
was the one who turned it from 3 receptions to 25 yards while Najee is out there 2 for 7. Being a first round pick definitely plays into it. Of course, it's the same GM and coach that's been there for like a decade plus. So when they're using a first round pick on a guy, they want to be proven right. And listen, Najee's a good player, right? He's a fine running back. He just doesn't have that explosiveness. He just doesn't have that ability to rip off, 40, 50-yard runs that you would hope you're getting if you're selecting a running back in the first round. But Jaylen Warren, you're right. He looks like the more impressive running back. I think the good news here for fantasy managers of both of these guys is this passing game is just not good. Kenny Pickett is not a good quarterback. Matt Canada has something to do with it for sure. His play calling in general, even though I thought today wasn't the worst I've ever seen Matt Canada
Agreed.
call a game. Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada is not a pairing you want, right? Matt Canada either needs to have an elite quarterback or Kenny Pickett needs to have an elite play caller to kind of uplift him. Because right now, I mean, we saw him miss a couple of gimmies this game. It didn't help that George Pickens had a wide open touchdown and he just couldn't drag that second foot. We know how good George Pickens is. I've seen him make way, way, way harder catches than that, probably 5-10 times this year than that gimme in the back corner of the end zone where he just can't drag his second foot. But the good news is I think both these running backs are going to be valuable. I think both of them are going to be used just because I don't think the Steelers completely trust Kenny Pickett to be able to go out there and just sling the rock 40 times. And I don't think that's how they want to play. I think they want to play through Jaylen Warren, play through Najee Harris. And then off of that, okay, we have Deontay Johnson in the short and intermediate route where he got 9 targets, 7 receptions, 90 yards and a touchdown. And George Pickens is our big play guy. Now, today wasn't great. 5 targets, -1 receiving yard. I mean, this is a bad game of all bad games for George Pickens. But this is what the offense is. They're run first. It's a lot of short stuff. It's a lot of screens and check downs to the running back. So both of these guys will be valuable, but they're probably both going to work they're going to get enough work to make neither of them top 15 type of guys. They'll
Mhm.
probably be both flex guys going forward.
So now you mentioned Pickens, of course, talking about the wide receivers. Deontay Johnson, he just has a vice grip on this wide receiver one role when he is on the field. I think we've known that Deontay Johnson has the talent edge over Pickens. It's the explosiveness, it's the wow type plays from a Pickens that kind of let your mind wander a little bit. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty, we understand that Deontay Johnson is just the more reliable guy. Last week saw him 14 targets, obviously outsnapped the Pickens, where I believe he only had one catch for that ended up being a touchdown, of course. But then this week, 9 targets again, brings in 7 of them, has 90 yards, gets into the end zone for the first time since 2021. Can you tell
Since
me who was
Big
a
Ben.
quarterback? Who was it
Big
since
Ben.
Big Ben was on the field? That was his last time that he caught a touchdown pass. So Deontay Johnson, to me, I say this as someone who was extremely high on Deontay coming into the season during draft time. It hurt when he was injured and had the hamstring injury. But if you are a manager and you have Deontay Johnson on your team like I do, you should be looking at it like a saving grace for the idea that he was out for 4 weeks. He already had his bye week. You will probably already work through it. Me, I was 0-3. I was in the gutter. That's around that time that Deontay Johnson was out. I was 4-3 the week that Deontay Johnson came back. Right now, we're going into week 9. I have a beautiful 19-point head start because of Deontay Johnson right now. I don't have to worry about Deontay's bye week anymore. For the rest of the season, he's good to go 100%. And with this target share that he's seeing, I can feel uberly confident that I have my strong wide receiver 2 right here.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about, I'm looking just at the Pittsburgh receiving group. Deontay, 9 targets. Najee is second with 4. And then we're talking about Jalen Warren and Connor Hayward with 3 targets. And then the next receiver, George Pickens, has 5 that goes for -1 yard. So he's a very stable, very reliable wide receiver too. Because last season he was a top 40 wide receiver and he scored 0 touchdowns. He was just straight receptions, receiving yards. Like, this is the line you're going to get. It's going to be the 8 for 80s, 7 for 90s. He's going to get the receptions. He's going to get the yards. He's not really a receiver that's going to go off for like that 150 type of game, but he's going to be one of the most steady wide receiver 2s that you could have in fantasy.
Now, moving on from the Thursday night football game, let's get into our starts and sits of the week.
Let's do it.
Sir, we're going to start with you. Give me your quarterback start of week 9.
So I did my starts and sits just a little bit differently this week.
Okay.
I didn't have a ton of guys that I'm like, this is the week they're going top 5. This is the week they're going to have their big breakout game. But a lot of these starts are probably going to be like QB2s, RB2s, wide receiver 2s that are probably start sit decisions for a lot of people out there. And I kind of want to give them the nudge one way or the other. So starting off the quarterback position, I'm going with Bryce Young.
Love it.
To start off the season, he was kind of the butt of jokes because we saw CJ Stroud get off to a hot start. Anthony Richardson was breaking fantasy football before he went out to an injury, and Bryce was kind of lagging behind. But since week 5, he's been quarterback 15 in fantasy points per game. He's limited the turnovers, 5 total touchdowns these last 3 weeks. Now he gets another good matchup against the Colts, who allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game. And like I said, this isn't like a you must start Bryce Young top 5 big 300-yard 3-touchdown game coming. But if you're in a 2 QB league, and whether it's buys, whether it's injuries, we've seen multiple quarterbacks go down now at this point. I mean, there's like 9 backup quarterbacks playing right now. Bryce Young's a strong quarterback to start. The only thing I really wish we would see more is him rushing. Those first couple of weeks, he had at least one game of 30-plus rushing yards. He really hasn't done that. He's someone that is standing in the pocket. He's looking to throw the ball. He almost makes no effort to get out of the pocket and rush. He has the athletic ability to do it, but right now he's just firmly a pocket passer. But with him, the connection he has with Adam Thielen, I think he's a strong start this week.
I love that option. I really love the fact that Bryce, these last couple of weeks, has gotten a lot more comfortable. He's trusting what he's seeing, and I think he kind of learned this from Andy Dalton the one week that Andy Dalton stepped in. Don't overthink it. See your top guy. If he's the one guy that you want to feel confident that you can just throw to him on a consistent basis, you know he's going to get the ball and he's going to get your confidence going, throw the ball to Adam Thielen. And we kind of have seen that since he's come back from the injury. He's really trusted Thielen. He's really just allowed himself to trust what he's seeing on the field. And he's really progressed week to week. We saw it on display versus the Texans. So I love that option. To me, it gets very simple. And that's going to be Mr. Daiquiri Prescott versus the Philadelphia Eagles, who right now rank 30th against fantasy quarterbacks. They are giving up a ton of points. And Dak Prescott, who these last couple of weeks has been on a tear in his own right, is ready to take off. And going up against Philadelphia, it's definitely not a defense that I worry too much about. I get it. It's a division game. But with the way that we've seen Dak Prescott play football these last couple of weeks, destroyed the Rams, didn't have the cleanest game against the Chargers, but was QB1 on the week. He has gotten better and better as the season has gone on. And I mentioned on the last show, the schedule does lighten up. And going up against Philadelphia, I don't know if there would be a better play than Dak Prescott. Now, I'll get right into the sit, sir. My quarterback sit of the week is going to be going up against your Baltimore Ravens, and that's going to be Mr. Geno Smith. Baltimore Ravens are allowing the fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks, and Geno Smith has been the epitome of up and down. It's not a matchup that I can feel overly confident with, and I say Geno Smith because this is a guy that some people had to rely on as their quarterback. 1 and 2 quarterback leagues most definitely is in a ton of people's lineups, going up against the Baltimore Ravens, who allow 5 less points than the average of the NFL. I can't feel confident, especially with the way that the Ravens are playing right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. Geno is someone I'm definitely looking to sit. You're not going to love this one, but my sit of the week's going to be Daniel Jones. I know you go out there.
That's an L. That's an L.
If you're playing on sleeper, you see the green with Las Vegas. You see this Raiders team that's been down the dumps, just fired their head coach and GM and benched their quarterback. I need Daniel Jones and this Giants team to prove something to me before I could have any faith in this offense. Right. And so far, he's had one really, really great elite half against the Arizona Cardinals, where he ended up being QB1 on the week, the best quarterback in all of fantasy football, better than Mahomes and Hurts and everybody.
He clears.
But all of the other weeks, QB28, QB31, QB24, QB26. So you tell me what the outlier is. Now, listen, if you're a Giants fan out there, if you're a Daniel Jones manager and you have no other choice in a 2 QB league and, you have Brock Purdy on bye or something like that, you could sell yourself by saying Saquon's back. Andrew Thomas might be back. I don't have Darren Waller, but hey, we're going up against the Raiders, whose defense has been kind of susceptible. Here and there against marginal quarterbacks, they've been able to shut them down. Mac Jones, Jordan Love, they've done a respectable job against those guys. But for me, Daniel Jones I have no trust in him. I have no trust in the offense. I have no trust in the offensive line. So regardless of matchup, regardless of how bad the defense is, he's not someone I could go out and start because the ceiling might be really high, right? We've seen the QB1 finish, but we know what the floor is. The floor is he's someone that can absolutely tank your week.
Listen, I don't like to do the gotcha on the fantasy reaction. We saved that for the Pick Aside podcast, but I'm letting you know right now, if Daniel Jones blows up against Las Vegas, I most definitely will be here to let you know about it.
I'll be here.
Now,
I'm not hiding.
Now let me ask you a question. Do you trust Geno Smith? Like you don't trust Daniel. Do you trust Geno Smith?
Ideally I don't want to start either of them. I would rather probably start Geno still.
This week against Baltimore, would you rather start Geno Smith or would you rather start Daniel Jones?
Geno.
You're lying. Lying.
I'll take the chance. Geno Smith.
Geno Smith has one game over 20 points. You know who that's reminiscent of? Daniel fucking Jones.
How many games does he have more than 10?
Geno, all of them except 2.
Okay, how about Daniel Jones?
Not great. He has.
Got
Here's the thing. I'm fine with that. Against Arizona, regardless of what you want to say, good game, amazing game. Geno Smith has had over 15 fantasy points twice. Every other time we have 13 points, 13 points, 13 points, 9 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points. One of those was against the New York Giants, which we kind of forgive because he was injured in that game. Respect Daniel Jones and the fact that he's played with nothing Nothing. Andrew Thomas is gone. Evan Neal's one of the worst rookie tackles that we've seen in some time. Darren Waller, up and down, has looked good, of course, but then, of course, now is going through this injury. Saquon Barkley out of the lineup. Can we give my guy the benefit of the doubt,
I'm not
please?
saying I'm not up here saying it's all Daniel Jones's fault. He's terrible. He's never going to be good again. But you just run through Geno Smith's game logs. How about 4.4,
Okay.
32, crazy,
Amazing.
3.9,
Hmm.
8.7, and
Okay.
7.1?
How many? What's the snap percent in the 7.1?
68%.
Yeah, he got hurt. Context, bro. Add
He still played
context.
3/4 of the game. He would have finished with maybe 12 if he was lucky.
I'm willing. Listen, gentleman's agreement right now. I'll put cash on it. Daniel Jones has a better finish than Geno Smith.
Okay, let's do it.
All
I'll
right,
take Geno.
gentleman's five. Gentleman's
Gentleman's
five.
five. Gentleman's
All right.
five.
All right. So let's move on to our running back starts of the week. Mr. Joel Dehls, who is your running back start of the week?
So I'm going we usually do one, but I want to go with the pairing here because there's two guys that I think are probably on a lot of people's teams. You picked them up in the waiver wire. They were not drafted, but I like both of their decisions this week, or both their matchups, I should say. The first one's going to be Darrell Henderson going up. These last 2 weeks, he's going up against the Packers, that is. These last 2 weeks, he's averaging 17 touches per game. That's all you could ask for. And week 9, 8, whatever it is of this NFL season, there's not much more you could ask for than a running back that's going to get 17 touches. And while he hasn't been the most efficient, averaging nearly or not even averaging 3.1 yards per carry, he's getting the opportunity. And as I mentioned, going up against the Packers, who allowed the 7th most rushing yards per game and overall the 9th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, I understand Brett Ripien might be out there. Maybe it's Matt Stafford if we get lucky. But either way, I think Darrell Henderson, I think they'll be able to move the ball against the Packers, whether that's going to be checkdowns, whether it's going to be running the ball using Puka and Cooper Kupp. I think they'll have some success offensively, at least enough for Darrell Henderson to be in your starting lineup. The other one's going to be Zach Moss. He's someone that I have in our main league, and every week he's on my bench because I'm like, this is the week, this is the week, this is the week, and it hasn't been the week. He's RB4 on the season. It feels like the fakest RB4 season I've ever seen in fantasy football. But even with Jonathan Taylor back, he's found ways to get involved. He's yet to have a game with less than 12 touches. His floor has been about 60 total yards, and he's shown to have reliable hands and usage in the receiving game, where he had 6 catches in week 6. Now he's going up against Panthers, who I know you said you want to make Jonathan Taylor your start of the week. Of course, he's a phenomenal start this year. But he's shown that he could be the workhorse for this team, but he could also be the RB2 to Jonathan Taylor. And I think in this matchup going up against Carolina, both of these guys could have top 20 finishes.
I really like that for the idea that Carolina is such an intriguing matchup whenever a running back does face them. I know last week we kind of had a little bit of a hiccup where Dameon Pierce just could not get into the end zone no matter how hard he tried. This week, going up against Jonathan Taylor, going up against Zach Moss, who's been one of the most underappreciated running backs in fantasy football this season. And maybe let me not say fantasy football. I only say that because you underappreciate him, like you just mentioned, how you just can never talk yourself into putting him into your lineups. But in real life football, all people are fixated with is, of course, Jonathan Taylor. But this guy, Zach Moss, needs his acknowledgement. He's done himself a great job, not only just filling in the role for Jonathan Taylor when he's gone, but also being his counterpart. And yeah, of course, Jonathan Taylor versus Carolina, that is going to be all day. Now, my running back start of the week is an ironic one. I say ironic because I've been here multiple times having him as my sit of the week. Now, I have been enlightened, and now it's coming into fruition, his usage in the passing game, and that's none other than Rachaad White. Rachaad White, these last 2 games, has seen 6 catches, 7 catches, one game for 65 yards, the other for 70 yards. Has not gotten to the end zone. That's the one thing that he's missing, but has been able to be fantasy relevant for both of these weeks. 13 fantasy points and 15 fantasy points, respectively. But he's missing that touchdown, and that's really what's not keeping him from being in that next tier up of running backs on a week-to-week basis. Now, going up against Houston, who rank right now 18th against the running back position, it's a defense that, again, They have been on the downward trajectory since the beginning of the season. We're kind of seeing them be who we were all kind of anticipating at the beginning of the year. But again, we like the players on that team. We're still hoping for the best. But again, as time does go on, you start to become a little bit more concerned. Now, for Rashad White, he's still seeing an insane amount of snap percentage. He's seeing 75. He's seen over 70% in every single game so far this season. Last week, we saw him just miss the top 10 as RB11. And seeing the amount of targets that he has been seeing these last couple of weeks, it allows me to feel confident that he is an integral part in this offense.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going up against Rashad White this week, so respectfully, I hope maybe he just twists an
Understandable.
ankle first quarter. So you're not wrong. You're not wrong. He just got injured. The first quarter, little twist of an ankle. He's good for next week. But no, I like that. I like that decision. Now, my running back sits of the week. So my running back starts. It was a mix of opportunity plus good matchups. My running back sits are going to be. You have the opportunity, but the matchups are just disgusting. The first one is going to be DeMarcado, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. Clayton Tune starting. They're going up against the Cleveland Browns. This is an ugly position. You might go in and he might be on your waiver wire. You're like, oh, wait, these last 2 weeks, 20 carries for 15, 17. I forgot what he had the week prior. Maybe he has a chance. And listen, I'll start him over like a Justice Hill or a Miles Sanders. But in an offense that's going to have virtually no ceiling unless, the off chance Kyler Murray plays. And then going up against a great Browns defense on the road. No, thank you. And the other one's going to be the Texans running backs, whether it's going to be Dameon Pierce or if he's injured, he hasn't practiced the last couple of days, Devin Singletary. They've just shown no ability to get any kind of run game going. Pierce has 2 games over 50 rushing yards. He has more finishes as RB 40 or worse than he does his top 30 finishes. Now going up against Tampa Bay, who's one of 2 teams who have yet to allow a rushing touchdown all season and allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. It does not feel like this is the week that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers rush defense gets broken. So while all opportunity is welcome and, in the right position should be rostered just for the off chance that, maybe a guy like DeMarcado, who we don't really know much about, still a young running back, maybe he could turn into something. These matchups going up against the Browns and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I don't really care about the opportunity just because the ceiling of both of them are so low.
Yeah, that Arizona running back room is an interesting one. I say that with the idea that it was supposed to be DeMarcado, then Keontae Ingram suddenly comes out of nowhere. But like you just mentioned, a couple weeks in a row, we've seen DeMarcado dominate the running back room. But then the week 10, allegedly, we're supposed to have James Conner back. These matchups just aren't ideal right now, especially like you just mentioned for a DeMarcado. And without a true quarterback at the helm, what can you really trust in this Arizona offense? So I'm with you. My name is a little bit bigger, and by a little bit, I mean a lot of it bigger. And now this is just for those that feel like their hands forced. I have to put him in my lineup. It's Aaron Jones. That we're not gonna have a player of his talent for the round that I drafted him. I can't justify having him on my bench. You simply have not seen the result that you wanted outside of week 1. In the last 2 weeks, the first week off of bye against Denver, 36% of snaps. And then last week we saw versus Minnesota, only 51% of snaps. It's obvious they're trying to ease him in, but it's also obvious that he's not 100% back from this hamstring injury. And we had this conversation before with hamstring injuries and talking about the lasting effects of the injury. There's no injury I want a player on my team to have less than a hamstring injury. Talking on the lesser scale injuries, of course, we're ACLs, Achilles, that's a whole different conversation. But of course, when we're talking soft tissue injuries, a sprained ankle, stuff like that, a hamstring injury is one that lingers on so much longer, and we're seeing it evident with Aaron Jones right now. And going up against the Los Angeles Rams, who right now allow the 7th fewest points to fantasy running backs, with the way that he's been producing, with the lack of touches that we're seeing Aaron Jones garner in this offense, I'm letting you know I understand if you want to put Aaron Jones on your bench, because right now that seems the right thing to do.
So hypothetically, you have a team out there with Aaron Jones, but they also have Zach Moss and Jerome Ford. Right now, how low are we going here with Aaron Jones? Are we saying Jerome Ford still dealing with that ankle injury? Kareem Hunt was getting involved. Like, are you going that low, or is it just like we really think of Aaron Jones as like a top 12 type running back, but he's probably in that 20 to 30 range this week.
Let me look at your matchup because we know what you're asking for right now. Zach Moss going up against Carolina. That's 1000% okay with me. Now, Jerome Ford also nursing his own injury. It is an ankle injury. He was limited in practice. Going
He
up
played him
against
last week.
Arizona, who's been very forgiving against the run themselves. Listen, man, put Jerome Ford in the lineup. Put Jerome Ford in the lineup. You can live with that floor as opposed to what you've been getting with Aaron Jones, which has been essentially nothing.
Yeah, I don't disagree. But let's go ahead and move on to wide receivers because my running backs just make me depressed.
Unfortunately.
There's not a lot of weeks, not a lot of spots you can be able to start this guy. But going up against the worst pass defense in the NFL, you could start Garrett Wilson. I'm with it this week.
Ah,
I'm fine with this starting Garrett Wilson because not only are they the worst passing defense in the NFL, they're the worst by 30 yards. The difference between number 1 and number 2 worst is the same as the number 2 and the 10th worst passing defense in the NFL. That's how terrible this Chargers defense has been. They've allowed multiple 400 plus passing yard games, one to your guy, to a week 1 against Miami. We had Tyson Bagent last week complete 67% of his passes for over 230 yards. Now, to be fair, some of that was in garbage time. And they've also allowed really Ryan Tannehill's only good game all season long. So we've seen them let up those crazy 400 plus yard games, and we've seen them let up really good games to lower tier quarterbacks. And that's what Zach Wilson is right now. High level backup player. That's what I'm giving him. That's his stamp. But the Jets have shown, this last month that there's going to be games they have to throw the ball, and you can't just sit there and hide Zach Wilson, right? I think that week 1 against Buffalo, week 2 a bit against Dallas, where they were just terrified of Zach Wilson making a mistake where they did not want him to throw the ball. Then we had that Chiefs game where Zach's like, listen, in the right situation, I'll be able to complete some passes. He had 39 attempts in the Kansas City games, 33 attempts against Philly. So when they're going up against another high-powered offense, which I would label the Chargers as, they've shown the ability to throw the ball or at least have the attempts. And Garrett Wilson is number 1, whether it's going to be in the screen game. Zach gives him at least one chance a week, just 50-50 ball, go up and get it. So this is a team that the Jets should be able to move the ball on. Garrett Wilson should have at least 7 targets. And if Garrett Wilson's getting 7 targets, he's going to be able to turn that into something special. So I think overall, the Jets are going to be forced to throw the ball here and give it to my guy, Garrett. He can make some special things happen.
Garrett Wilson is an unbelievable talent, and it's unfortunate we didn't have the opportunity to see him work with Aaron Rodgers. It would have been a spectacular season. We spoke about it on the Pick Side podcast, talking about players that separate at the highest rate in the NFL. And Garrett Wilson's in that top 10 list because of how special of a player he is. All he does is get open. It's unfortunate that on a consistent basis, he can't have his quarterback hit him in stride. Now, my wide receiver start of the week is a player that has become very near and dear to my heart. Now, in fantasy football, you get a player like this that doesn't come around very often. A player that in real life is excruciating to watch. He's not the most athletic. Sometimes when it comes to a player like this, Father Time just gets the better of them, just does not have that same step that they once did. But when it comes to fantasy football, all they do is produce. And it's a special thing that you really don't get to experience often. I'm talking about Adam Thielen, a guy that has at this point put up I'm talking stupid numbers. Outside of week 1, he has had double digits in every single game, has seen double-digit targets in 1, 2, 3, 4 games of the 7 that he's played. He has been a fantasy dream. And I say that with the idea that he was picked up off waivers. You probably got him for cheap, and he's giving you top 10 fantasy production. This is my start of the week going up against Indianapolis because last week he had a modest performance, right, for Adam Thielen at this point. 8 catches, 72 yards. Wasn't the most explosive Thielen game that we've seen, because I say that with prior to this game, 3 of the last 4 had over 100, had gotten into the end zone. I think we're talking about Adam Thielen continuing the dominance that we've seen in fantasy football. I'm making him my start of the week to emphasize he's here to stay. He's not going anywhere because, like Joel mentioned, talking about Bryce Young, this matchup is not only great for Bryce, who's going to be the recipient of this, the only guy that Bryce Young trusts on a consistent basis, and that is Mr. Adam Thielen. No doubt this is my start of the week.
I like that. Moving on to my wide receiver sit. This might be the last week we're gonna have him in our sit column, maybe ever. But Hollywood Brown, a lot similar things I said about the DeMarcado sit is going to be said here. Clayton Tune is playing. You're on the road. You're going up against Cleveland. To start off the year, Hollywood was so strong, right? He was wide receiver 26, 19, 19, 17. It was like, damn, this was probably one of the steals of the draft. He's been a very consistent wide receiver too. But since week 6 on, he's been wide receiver 54, 47, and 23. Hasn't had that same consistency. Really hasn't the same productivity because the targets are still there. He has one game all season of less than 7 targets. The quarterback play just hasn't been good enough. Now, I think Clayton Tune is still a downgrade from Josh Dobbs. So if Josh Dobbs isn't able to get it done, that goes to show what I think about Clayton Tune. I don't think he'll be able to get it done going up against this defense. But this is probably one of the last weeks you have a chance to go out there and get Hollywood Brown because we're expecting Kyler to be back next week. And if Kyler Murray's back and he's getting the same targets that he did in either this season or what he was getting last year, go and look at Hollywood's numbers before he went down to injury last year. He was on pace for like a 1,400 yard season. He was going to have a really great year. He went down to injury, and things, obviously, Kyler went down later, and then the whole season kind of fell apart. But this week with Clayton Tune going up against number 1 pass defense in the NFL on the road, no thank you. But going forward, I feel very confident about Hollywood.
Yeah, if Kyler Murray is on the field, McBride becomes one of the best tight ends. We're talking about Hollywood being one of the better wide receivers in fantasy football. That's the difference maker that Kyler Murray is. But with you, Clayton Tune as the quarterback going up against this pass defense, absolutely not. No, thank you. My sit of the week is a sad one, and I'm just going to get right to it. It's Jordan Addison. Now, the matchup really is not even one it's that bad. It's Atlanta. They've been average. They're literally 15th in terms of giving up fantasy points to the wide receiver. That's almost right about halfway point. I cannot trust this guy without Kirk Cousins at the quarterback. There's just no way I can trust putting him in my lineup confidently from what he's given us. Just what is it? 7 touchdowns on the season, 6 or 7 touchdowns. It's one of the two. I'm blanking off the top of my head. It's been special production out of the rookie, but with Jaren Hall at the quarterback, there's no way I can feel great with him in my lineup on a consistent basis. He's a flex play. If you're desperate, you put him in your lineup. I'm torn between Romeo Doubs and Jordan Addison. That's how strongly I'm considering this situation. I'm going to lean Jordan Addison, but if you have a slightly better option, don't hesitate to think about it. I just don't. I'd rather play it safe. You don't know what you're going to get unless Jaren Hall is going to blindly throw the ball to Jordan. I struggle to feel confident in the play.
Yeah, it really feels like this could be a lost season for Addison because we saw, we're expecting Josh Dobbs to eventually take over the starting role. And, we saw early on, I just mentioned him and Hollywood were able to get things going. But then the last month of the season, when more tape was out there, more tendencies were out there, they weren't able to really, really get connected. So Addison, the talent is there. If you're in a dynasty league, you should feel fantastic about him. But for redraft the rest of the year, he's a very boomer bust wide receiver 3. So going on to tight ends, my start of the week, Dalton Kincaid. We've talked about him a couple weeks ago. We talked about him when that Dawson Knox injury happened. These last 2 weeks, he's averaging 7 targets, 6 receptions, 70 yards, and had a touchdown in one of those games against Tampa Bay. He also saw a season high in snap percentage at 84% last week. Back-to-back weeks of 10-plus fantasy points on a high-powered offense. In a game this week going up against the Cincinnati Bengals where I think everyone's expecting a high-scoring game. You got 2 great quarterbacks, you got 2 great offenses, and 2 defenses that I'm not exactly sold on all the way. Probably trust the Bengals a little bit more than the Bills right now, but neither of them I feel great about. So Dalton Kincaid, Joel mentioned it during our Patreon today. It feels like they felt something, or they found something with this 11 personnel, having Khalil Shakir out there, and Dalton Kincaid, and of course Dawson Knox is not on the team or on IR right now. So Kincaid is probably a must-start tight end going forward, and I love him this week against Cincinnati.
Definitely love Kincaid. Probably my favorite start at the tight end position this week too. Not of the obvious guys, but to throw another name at you, it'll be Jake Ferguson versus Philadelphia. When they've played solid tight end options, Hunter Henry scored against them. We saw TJ Hawkinson have his best game of the season versus the Eagles. And this past week, Logan Thomas gets into the end zone as well. Jake Ferguson last week has gotten into the end zone. We saw him get into the end zone a little bit earlier, has kind of got lost in between there. But there is a vulnerability in this secondary, talking about Philadelphia. And Jake Ferguson, Dak has shown he can target Jake Ferguson when they get into that goal line area. I could not pick CD Lamb as my start of the week. That's way too obvious. We know that he's going to have himself a baller game. So I found a little bit of a cop out. I think Jake Ferguson's a great play this week. Now for tight end sit, are we just going to allow you guys to start whoever you want?
I actually have one that I'm interested to get your opinion.
All right, let's hear it.
And say a non-PPR league, because this guy gets peppered with receptions and targets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to start TJ Hawkinson? Like if you had Kincaid and Hawkinson, would you? I'd rather start Kincaid because I'm looking at TJ Hawkinson right now. He's been killed by ADOT all season long, right? Like I'm looking at his yards per target. We're talking about 8 yards, 7 yards, 8 yards, 6 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards, 9 yards. Like this is a guy that it is before the sticks. He has not seen more than 10 plus yards in terms of targets. And now you have a major quarterback downgrade. Overall, as an offense, it's going all the way down. The receptions are there week in and week out, but like he's really hovering around that. You know, he did have a couple of 80-yard games here and there, so I shouldn't say that. But it really feels like if you're not in a PPR or even half PPR league, it's going to be a risky play.
I see where your mind's at. It's similar to where I'm at with Jordan Addison, except Jordan Addison's been 30 times better on a consistent basis than a TJ Hawkinson. It just becomes so tough when you know what TJ Hawkinson is to fantasy managers and at the tight end position, strictly speaking. But without Kirk Cousins, I see where you're coming from. My one thing becomes you don't know how Jaren Hall is going to play this game, in the idea that is he just going to pepper a TJ Hawkinson with targets? There's some quarterbacks that their first read is to that tight end because it's the safest option. And in this case, TJ Hawkinson just happens to be one of the best options on this team. I see where you're coming from. It's one of those that you can wait a week, see how this Minnesota offense is without a Kirk Cousins going up against Atlanta. This is a middle of the pack defense, solid defense, I should say. But in terms of the secondary, it's not one of the upper echelon. You can learn a lot from this one game. So I'm with you. Let's use this game as a precursor. I can level and make him a sit on the week. Now, to recap all of them, Joel, go over all your starts and sits. Who are your start and sits of week 9 fantasy football?
Should I go through all starts first and all sits?
Sure.
Okay. At my quarterback position, Bryce Young will be my start of the week as a QB2. Not this crazy upside, but top 15 quarterback. He's been QB 15 from week 5 on, so he's someone that should, deserve some more respect. My running back starts, I have a pair. So not the craziest upside here, but guys that you either got on the waiver wire or they're on your bench and you're saying, should I start him this week? Darrell Henderson going up against the Packers, who allowed the 7th most rushing yards per game, is a great start. And Zach Moss going up against the Carolina Panthers. I think him and Jonathan Taylor can both finish in the top 20. My wide receiver star of the week, Garrett Wilson. There's not going to be a ton of weeks where you can start him, but going up against the Chargers defense, who allowed the most passing yards by far, by 30 yards in the NFL, I think Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson could have a connection this week. And my tight end start will be Dalton Kincaid, averaging 70 yards over the last 2 weeks.
My starts of the week going into week 9, quarterback, it's got to be Dak Prescott going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Right now, they rank 30th in terms of points allowed to fantasy quarterbacks. Dak has been great these last couple of weeks. I'm fully anticipating that he can continue that ride. Going over to the running back position, Rachaad White. He's been a menace in the receiving game. He's had 6 and 7 catches in the last 2 weeks, respectively, 65 yards, 70 yards. We're waiting on him to get into the end zone. He was a fringe top 10 running back this week going up against Houston. He can have a great game and one of my best plays. Wide receiver, Adam Thielen, has had double-digit fantasy points in every week but week 1. He's going up against Indianapolis. For the same reason that Joel likes Bryce Young, I like Adam Thielen. Of course, he's been one of the best fantasy options in fantasy football. And at the tight end position, I'm going with Jake Ferguson. He caught a touchdown last week going up against Philadelphia in that secondary. We've known that against good tight ends, they've given up some points to the tight end. Jake Ferguson can be one of those great plays. Now, going over to sits of the week. Joel, who are your sits of the week?
At the quarterback position, it's going to be Daniel Jones. I know he had that QB1 finish, but outside of
Don't
that,
regret this,
QB28,
Dehls. Don't
QB30,
regret this.
QB24, QB26. I know the Raiders matchup looks sexy on paper, but they're going to be playing with some fire with Antonio Pierce as the new head coach. So I'm sitting Daniel Jones this week. My running backs, it's going to be two guys who have opportunity but have terrible matchups. DeMarcado, running back of the Arizona Cardinals. This team is starting Clayton Tune. They're also going up against the Cleveland Browns on the road. No, thank you. I don't care if he gets to 15 to 20 touches. If he gets more than 50 yards, I would be shocked. And the other one's going to be whatever Texans running back is active, whether it's going to be Dameon Pierce or Devin Singletary. They haven't been able to run the ball. Pierce has 2 games of more than 50 rushing yards. So I don't trust either of these guys. Going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Here we go. Can't talk. Going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have yet to allow a rushing touchdown all season. And just like I mentioned, DeMarcado and running back sit, Hollywood Brown. There's going to be a time where Kyler Murray is healthy. And when Hollywood is healthy and Kyler Murray is healthy, he could be a top 15 type wide receiver. But right now, going up against Cleveland, number 1 pass defense in the NFL, and someone who has one top 30 finish in the last 3 weeks, I don't think you could start Hollywood. And lastly, the tight end position, I love TJ Hawkinson. You could still start him. But this week with Jaron Hall, I don't think the same upside is there that we've seen these last couple of weeks of him getting 80-plus yards and getting a touchdown.
My sits of week 9 at the quarterback position, I'm going with Geno Smith versus the Baltimore Ravens. Geno has been one of the most disappointing fantasy quarterbacks in 2023. He's only had 2 games of over 15 fantasy points. He has really been underwhelming going up against the team that gives up the fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks. He's my sit of the week. At the running back position, I'm going with Aaron Jones. Bigger name. We understand he's one of the more talented running backs, but outside of week 1, he, of course, has been dealing with this hamstring injury. Since coming back, it seems as if the Packers are limiting his workload. I cannot trust him going up against the Rams, who right now are allowing 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Wide receiver goes hand in hand with Joel's tight end sit. I'm sitting Jordan Addison, who has 7 touchdowns on the season. He has been unbelievable, putting on an amazing rookie season. I just can't get myself to start him when Jaron Hall is at the quarterback, and I am very uncertain how this offense will look. And I'm going to backpack with Joel, my tight end sit of the week. It's got to be a TJ Hawkinson. Let us see 1 week of this Minnesota offense versus a middle-of-the-pack defense in Atlanta and see how this offense looks, and we can adjust accordingly whether or not these 2 guys can be in our lineups week to week. Now, moving on to the last segment of the show before we get into your guys' super chats and questions. Again, if you guys have any start sits questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section right now or leave them in the chat. We'll answer them right before we wrap up the show. But again, before we move on to our last segment, if you guys have stuck around this long, go ahead and drop a like on this video. It helps us out a ton. If you aren't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go ahead and turn on the notification bell so you know when we're going live, like nights like tonight and Sunday nights. That's the new time that we're going live on the Fantasy Reaction. You know when we're dropping videos for Pick Aside. You know when Riv Academy is going live. You know when the Joel Moran show is dropping. But go ahead and do yourself a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We would really appreciate it. You guys have been doing an unbelievable job with subscribing to the channel recently. Recently we just broke 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. It took us some time, but you know what? We grinded, we stayed true to it, and here we are. We get to reap the rewards. But again, that would not be possible without you guys. You guys are absolutely unbelievable. You guys make this the easiest job that a guy can ask for. Now, let's move on to the last segment of the show. The Blue Tent Report. Mr. Dehls, give me those that we have to worry about with injuries, please.
Yes, sir. One of these, we're going to start out with your guy, Drake London, who has been phenomenal, honestly,
The
right? After that
groin,
week
man.
one dud, he's been great, but has not practiced Wednesday and Thursday with that groin injury. We'll see what happens Friday, but back to back days of DNPs, usually not a great sign. Um, Very small, but Graham Gano is going on IR now. Why the Giants have him kicking field goals and then 3 days later gets put on IR is beyond me. But regardless, fantasy relevant player. So Josh Downs. He showed up on the injury report with a knee injury. He was full on Wednesday, got downgraded to limited on Thursday. I'm not worried yet. We know Josh Downs has been, one of the better flex plays this season. Rookie wide receiver, has an obvious connection with Gardner Minshew, has nearly 500 yards halfway through the year. So something to keep an eye on. But if he's practicing Friday, I'm still feeling good about it. Gerald Everett returned to practice on Thursday. Probably not someone we're really looking to start, but if you're desperate against the Jets, Odell Beckham is also back at practice on Thursday. Here's a big one. Gus Edwards. He didn't practice on Wednesday. Seems like it was more of a rest thing. He was back, was nursing a toe injury. He has that quote out there saying he wants the whole load. He wants the whole load of work for this upcoming week going up against Seattle Seahawks. So Gus Edwards, who has 2 games and 4 touchdowns, you should fire him up this week. Moving on, Deebo Samuel, dealing with that shoulder injury, says he's ready to go. He went on FanDuel's Kay Adams show, and he said he's going to play this week. So that's going to be, not this week. They're on bye, but the week following, once they're off bye, Deebo Samuel is going to be 100%, and that should only help the offense. Someone who will play this week and also dealing with a shoulder injury is going to be Josh Allen. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but then Thursday, full participant. So any worries that came up on Wednesday should be thrown out the door. He's playing or practicing Thursday. I'm sure he'll practice tomorrow and will be full go Sunday night. Darren Waller was ruled out pretty early in the week. Thursday, he was ruled out with that hamstring injury. I think we even mentioned it on the Sunday show where I didn't even see Darren Waller get pulled out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And before the end of the first quarter, he was ruled out. So when you see someone ruled out that quickly, it's usually not a good sign. He's been dealing with this hammy for multiple years now. It's sad that he really can't get 100% over this. And with the Giants team that is kind of sinking, or at least feels like it's sinking, there's probably no real rush to get him back. So if you're in a league that doesn't have an IR, I wouldn't be surprised if they put him on IR. So I do think he's droppable in most leagues. Raheem Mostert was back at practice Thursday, DNP on Wednesday, but he's back. He said he is good to go 100%, playing in Germany. We had that D-Hop injury, but he ended up playing tonight. Saquon remains limited in practice. He should be good to go. And Daniel Jones was a full participant in practice Wednesday. I'm not sure. I didn't see his practice report today, but I think you said he was Thursday. He was practiced today, right, Drew?
Saquon, you're saying? Saquon was limited.
Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones was a full participant.
Yep. So we're expecting him to be back. Deshaun Watson has returned to practice, but we still don't know if he's going to play. He came out and said that I couldn't tell you one way or another. So I don't really know what to do with Deshaun Watson right now. Thankfully it's a Sunday regular, 1:00 game or whatever. So no crazy adjustments have to be made, but it's really hard to say when Deshaun Watson is going to be back. And when he is back, he's been great for fantasy, but are we going to get the same Deshaun we saw those first couple of weeks if he's dealing with this shoulder injury that he can't seem to get over? Like he's practicing, but he's not ready to play. So I don't really know what to do there. But if he's playing, you're probably going to have to start him. A couple of quarterback changes this week as well. So Aiden O'Connell is going to start for the Raiders. Taylor Heineke is going to start for the Falcons. Jimmy G has been terrible this year. So I think for Devontae Adams' sake, for Jacoby Myers' sake, but specifically Tay, because him and Jimmy G just have not been on the same page, I think this is good news. Same thing for Taylor Heineke. Desmond Ridder has not been good this year. I'm shocked that they didn't go harder at any quarterback, whether it's in the draft or free agency or a trade for like a Lamar Jackson, but Taylor Heineke will be the starter going forward. That's about all I got for injuries. We had a couple of trades happen, but nothing drastic that's going to impact fantasy.
Yeah, it was inevitable that we saw the Falcons move on from a Desmond Ridder to a Taylor Heineke. I saw some extreme waiver additions trying to spend way too much money to acquire a Taylor Heineke. That just goes to show you the level of desperation that we are witnessing with fantasy quarterbacks, especially when you're in 2 quarterback leagues. Now, let's get on to the last part. Let's go ahead and read some super chats, and then we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Again, we thank you guys for those that have stuck around throughout the entirety of the show. You guys are amazing. Now, Big Chief donates for it, $4.99. Shout out to you, Big Chief. Says, what's up,
Shout out
boys?
Big Chief.
Appreciate the live. Spoon was Rookie of the Month, future Defensive Player of the Year coming your way. It speaks volumes to how great this draft class's cornerbacks are. Christian Gonzalez out for the season. He was early contention for Defensive Player of the Year. You mentioned Devon Witherspoon. He's been incredible in his own right. Of course, we talked about Joey Porter early on in the show. The only one who hasn't been living up to expectation right now is Emmanuel Forbes, because my guy over there in New York, Deonte Banks, has been going ahead and doing his thing too. This class has been phenomenal, and it does need that acknowledgement. We're talking about the quarterbacks, but really the true stars have been the cornerbacks so far this season. I eat hot dogs in public. Credit to you. He donates $4.99, says, if you take away Dak and Hurts, who has the better team? I still go with the Eagles, personally.
I'm still going with Philly, yeah.
I mean, you still have AJ.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go by positions, receiver. I'm going with the Eagles. Going by running back room. Probably would lean Tony Pollard. We could flip a coin, but I'll lean Tony. Offensive line, not a question. Going with the Eagles. Defensive line for the Eagles. Defensive line for Dallas. Does Micah automatically give you that edge? I think I'll lean Dallas.
Like interior, you lean Philly. Edge rushers, you lean Dallas.
Agreed, because you still have DeMarcus Lawrence over there in Dallas. You have to respect him. He seems to be one of the more underappreciated edge rushers in the league, because we automatically talk about Micah Parsons. I'll lean Dallas there. Middle linebackers, Van Der Esch, of course. I'll lean over there with Dallas, even though Van Der Esch struggles with injury when he's on the field. You got to respect his talent there. And cornerbacks, let's lean Dallas. But I guess with that idea,
neither of them.
It's pretty close. It's just the fact that Jalen Hurts just makes this a non-factor. But you asked me who has a better team without these two guys. I'll still lean Philadelphia. The Big Tuna 11 says, grade the trade. Traded Kamara, Pitts, Kincaid, and Chris. I saw this earlier. I didn't know how to feel. Kamara, Pitts, Kincaid, Christian Watson for Travis Kelce and Kenneth Walker III. I am going to be honest. I don't know if I love this. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. You got Travis Kelce. You got Ken Walker, who has a strong chance of finishing top 10. But we've seen these last couple of weeks, Zach Charbonnet is going to dig into his targets. Kenneth Walker, definitely the more talented of the two. But I'd be the fool to ignore how great Charbonnet looked last week versus Cleveland. Kamara has been a fantasy dream. He has not been the most efficient, but the workload that he's receiving is one of one. He's getting a ton of looks. He is definitely the best running back here, in my opinion. It's really, that's what it comes down to. But you get Kelce and Kenneth Walker. I mean, that's got to be it.
Yeah, it really depends on your team, because Kyle Pitts at this point, the inconsistency has shown. Like, we know the talent is there, and same thing for Christian Watson, who the offense is ugly. He's dealt with some injuries as well. So I'm really looking at this Kamara and Kincaid for Kelce and Walker. If you have a boatload of running backs and you're able to get Kamara around 5 or 6 and you're like, damn, I really need an upgraded tight end, I'm here for it. But if you got rid of Kamara and now all of a sudden you're stuck with Aaron Jones as your RB1, for example, I don't know if I like that as much. But as you mentioned, AK's just been getting so much work, especially in the passing game, that he's a top 10 running back or top 6, right?
Yeah.
And he missed the first 3 weeks.
So
he's been so insane. When at first glance, I was like, oh, you robbed them. And I'm like, wait, no, Alvin Kamara has been vintage Alvin Kamara this year. So you get Kelce and Kenneth Walker, but giving up AK, he could be a league winner this year.
Yeah, AK is a top 15 running back with missing the first 3 games of the season. Does have his bye not too late, week 11. That's not bad by any means. But a top 15 running back and you miss the first 3 games of the season, you have to be doing something insane. Now, that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show, episode 18 does come to an end. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be live with you guys Sunday night. It depends on, oh, well, no, most definitely we will be going live after the Sunday night football game. Bengals, Bills, way too good of a game to do the Fantasy Reaction Show at halftime. We may have a special guest depending on the outcome. We may have two special guests depending on the outcome.
Never know.
Who knows? That definitely is just going to be up to how good of a game that one's going to be. But again, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate all the love that you guys been showing us recently. It really means a lot to us. And we will